Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today. Well, it's focused entirely on this fascinating idea of agency over your own mind.
Yeah. Control over our thoughts.
Exactly. We're diving deep into how we can maybe tackle those persistent toxic thoughts, the ones that, so often feel like they're just completely in charge.
Like you're just along for the ride.
Right. So we've got sources here about a guide, a structured guide, for challenging these really deep-seated negative mental patterns. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. The main source material is centered around the book Get Out of Your Head by Jennie. And it just immediately sets up this pretty high-stakes premise. Are your thoughts actually holding you captive?
Yeah, it's a powerful question right off the bat.
And if they are, what do you do about it?
And what's fascinating, I think, is how the source material frames the solution. It describes this not just as, general self-help,
Right.
but specifically as a biblical guide. The aim is discovering how to submit our minds to Christ. So that immediately grounds this whole mental transformation process in a spiritual framework.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the central claim is huge. How we think inevitably shapes how we actually live.
That thoughts to life connection.
Yeah, and the ultimate promise, as it's presented, is that by surrendering every thought, the promises of God, fulfillment, peace, they'll flood your life. That's a pretty radical proposition for mental change.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It connects spiritual commitment directly to a psychological outcome.
Yeah.
So before we even get into the steps, this approach asserts a kind of foundational agency
GNC, yeah.
that, frankly, the modern learner often struggles to grasp. It really challenges just passively accepting mental suffering.
That leads us right to the guide's core principle, doesn't it? Stated so clearly, it's almost stark. We are in charge of our thoughts. They are not in charge of us.
That's a powerful statement. And if we connect this to let's say, the broader landscape of mental health philosophy, this idea of ultimate internal control is potent, regardless of the specific spiritual lens you apply. It actually echoes some core tenets of, say, Stoicism.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, that radical acceptance idea, right? You can't control external events, but you absolutely control your perception and your response to them. It puts the power squarely back inside.
So it's framing this spiritual act of submission almost as a psychological act of empowerment, moving the locus of control completely inward.
Precisely. And you mentioned a review earlier.
Yes, that strong rave review we saw. It speaks directly to the consequences of not grasping this control. It said, if you struggle with negative thoughts that leave you exhausted, you need this book.
Exhausted. That's the key word.
Yeah, the target listener here is clearly someone who feels mentally drained, just desperate for that shift in control.
Because that fatigue is the evidence, isn't it? It's evidence that the person believes their thoughts are the boss.
Right.
So the guide's immediate job is to dismantle that core belief, which naturally raises a big question for us. If the claims of mental liberation are this high, what specific actionable mechanisms does the guide actually provide? How do you get someone from feeling mentally exhausted to being firmly in charge? It needs more than just a declaration.
It definitely does. And thankfully, the material does outline a structured approach. It gives you a three-part action plan for this mental transformation, moving you from diagnosis to application, and then finally to empowerment.
A clear structure is so important. You're feeling overwhelmed, you need a map, right?
Absolutely.
So let's start with that diagnosis stage. The first step promised is to identify the negative thought patterns that are keeping you stuck.
Okay. Identify the patterns. When the source mentions patterns, what kind of cycles are we really talking about here? Because this isn't just about having an isolated bad day, is it?
No, not at all. Precisely. We're discussing those habitual, repetitive narratives.
Yeah.
The ones that kind of form our default emotional climate.
Okay, well, think of toxic patterns, like chronic comparison, maybe. Always measuring yourself against others. Or those debilitating what-if anxiety loops that just spiral.
Oh, yeah.
And they never lead to action, just paralysis. So the diagnosis phase is really about recognizing that these aren't random thoughts popping up. They are deeply grooved routines of thinking.
Routines, like mental habits.
Exactly. Habits that have to be consciously disrupted.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You can't fix the root if you don't even see the routine nature of the problem.
Right.
Now, the second step. This is where the guide really seems to blend disciplines. It promises to help you understand the science behind why your thoughts can change your life.
Ah, yes. And here's where a bit of a deeper dive is useful, especially for the general learner listening. When the guide talks about science, it's fundamentally leveraging concepts we know from psychology and neuroscience, things like cognitive restructuring and maybe more fundamentally, neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity, I've heard that term. That's the brain changing itself, right? Basically, yes. Simply put, it's the brain's amazing ability to change its structure and function throughout our lives. It does this by forming new neural connections. It's not static.
So the brain isn't fixed, and that's the scientific grounding for this whole idea that transformation is actually possible. It's not just wishful thinking.
Exactly right. The source material integrates this concept beautifully, I think. It shows that every time you consciously notice and then redirect a negative, toxic thought, like that chronic worry we mentioned, and you intentionally choose a different thought, maybe a positive one, maybe just a surrendered one, as the guide suggests, you are literally weakening the old neural pathway associated with the worry and strengthening a new one. This is the actual physiological mechanism underlying the guide's approach to, well, rewiring your mind.
Okay, so this means the spiritual practice they mentioned, submitting every thought, is being translated directly into the behavioral science of consistent, effortful cognitive restructuring.
Yes. The effort itself is what creates the lasting physical change in the brain.
That provides such a tangible mechanism. It's not just, hoping for change. It's applying consistent, directed effort that physically alters the system.
It really does. It shows a pretty sophisticated approach, using those behavioral insights to support the stated spiritual goals.
Yeah.
Very integrated.
That bridges us perfectly to the third component of the action plan then. This part focuses on the source of energy and motivation you need to actually sustain this difficult work. The guide aims to help the reader recognize your God-given power to confront and overcome your toxic thoughts.
And this really completes the framework, doesn't it? You've got the diagnosis, identifying the pattern. You've got the mechanism, understanding the science, the neuroplasticity.
Right.
And then you have the source of strength, recognizing this inherent power or authority to make the change. If the first two steps tell you how to change, this third step provides the motivation and the authority to actually execute that change consistently. It ensures that the effort required for neuroplasticity is maintained. It combats that fatalistic mindset of, oh, I just can't change how I think.
That is a very clear, self-reinforcing structure for mental change, isn't it? It seems designed to completely eliminate that feeling of powerlessness. Stepping back for just a second, let's consider the author, Jennie Allen. The source mentions she's a New York Times bestselling author.
Yes.
And she's also the founder and visionary behind two quite large faith-based initiatives, IF Gathering and Gather 25.
And that background is important context, I think. It tells you this material likely wasn't developed in some sort of isolation.
Right, not just theory.
No. It comes from a leader who clearly has experience translating complex spiritual ideas into actionable, often group-based practices for a massive community. It speaks to the scalability and the practical application focus of this guide.
And crucially, the source materials we looked at show this isn't really meant to be a solitary journey either. The author seems to have created this whole ecosystem of resources around the book itself.
Yes, exactly. And for you, the listener, the material really emphasizes application and, importantly, communal support.
Community.
Yes. Instead of just reading the book and hoping for the best, the approach encourages immediate, structured application. There's apparently an entire season dedicated to the book on the Made for This podcast.
Okay.
And there's a detailed book club kit available. It's free, I believe, specifically designed to help friends study the material together.
That makes sense. Accountability and shared experience.
It includes things like a reading guide, podcast links, worksheets, conversation questions for each week. That communal aspect really reinforces the idea that this kind of transformation often happens best when you're supported by others.
And for those who really want to ground the entire process in Scripture, there's also a specific Bible reading plan available through YouVersion, designed for starting the program.
So what we see is that the guide itself, while potentially powerful on its own, is really designed as the entry point into a more comprehensive system.
A whole system.
Yeah, a system aimed at ensuring these behavioral and mental changes are both initiated and sustained over time. It's clearly designed for implementation, not just passive reading or contemplation.
We've really moved from that initial challenge, the feeling of being mentally captive, all the way to a pretty structural three-part solution, one that leverages both faith and cognitive science to assert this idea of radical agency.
Absolutely. The guide provides a really distinct pathway. It's dedicated to moving you from a state of being mentally dictated to a state where you feel firmly in charge of your thoughts. And I think the genius of the framework, perhaps, lies in how it synthesizes these elements. the diagnosis, leveraging real cognitive mechanisms like neuroplasticity, and then establishing this undeniable source of power or authority to sustain the difficult work of essentially rewriting your mind.
And the power of that core thesis that we can be in charge of our thoughts, it really does seem to transcend the specific framework offered here, doesn't it?
I think so.
Whether you choose to approach this kind of mental work with the tools of, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, or the resilience found in Stoicism, or the specific spiritual framework provided in this guide, the foundational premise seems to hold. Agency over the mind isn't just an aspiration. It seems to be presented as an attainable skill.
Right. Our thoughts are not necessarily our inevitable masters.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is the lasting takeaway for you, the listener. If our thoughts truly shape how we live, as these sources claim, then we really have to address our deep assumptions about what is fixed versus what might actually be malleable within us. So here's something to consider as you move forward. What deep foundational thought patterns, perhaps about your own worth or your capabilities or maybe your future, what patterns do you currently accept as just immutable truth? Which of those might actually be the very first toxic routines you need to identify, challenge, and maybe submit to some rigorous examination? That could be the crucial first step.